We're inside of a Monet painting right now. I mean,
I feel that way. I feel like I've sat down, I've walked through here, Obi, as I do and take my walks around here, but actually sitting this close to these are buttercups or buttercups all over the place. It's wild.
Yeah, it is wild. And the blue dicks are around too. We should, do we get to work? Do we harvest these seeds?
If we don't, the squirrels and the raccoons and the skunks certainly do.
We also got some aliens. I see some dandelions, which are really huge, which are really good medicine there too.
They're lettuce. There you can eat them. That's basically wild lettuce.
Oh, there's enough for quite a salad here.
Yeah, I mean, you could live around here for a while, and especially if you had harvested, as we should have, the acorns from the trees and the pepper nuts from the bay trees. This small 3 acres here, probably we could survive a while.
Yeah, perhaps thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, so it is spring. It is the time of babies. The big baby in the room for you and I, childless as we are,
yes.
is The Forgetters.
Obi, yes, thank you for reading it. But before we go on to my book, let's not forget all the incredible books you have done and do on the place. And everybody who's listening, I was getting the scoop from Obi before we went live, and he just informed me, and he'll probably hit me over the head for even saying this, but he just finished his fire book, which is going to be so important. Yes. So that will be coming out when, Obi?
That is September, October, fire season.
Oh, great. So this year.
Yes. This year.
That's pretty amazing. Heyday must really love you because they put your books out fast. Mine, they take longer. I don't
That's
know.
interesting.
Yeah.
The State of Fire, Why California Burns is the official complete title, including that subtitle there. So it is. It's a really interesting take on an ecological process. It's the book that all my other books have sort of culminated towards.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, and that wasn't something that was planned. It's sort of this emergent property of the story procession, as it were, towards this energy release.
I was going to say it was a natural progression you found yourself towards the end of.
That's right. That's right.
And it's fire.
Exactly.
As you look around here, I mean, you see how lush a lot of particularly as a result of a lot of the foreign grasses, the oat grasses, which are so tall. And as lush and beautiful and high and green this is, of course, I'll have to cut it. Remember, it will all be dry in 4 months and fodder for fire. So the issue of fire all of a sudden has its season once again.
I am so proud to be here with you again, Place and Purpose. Thank you to the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria for hosting yet another episode. It's been a minute since it's been almost 6 weeks since we've sat down together.
Is it that long?
Yeah, it's
Time
been a while.
No wonder you got your book done. You get it. Obi can do a book in 6 weeks, and I want some of that. How you do that? But
I would have to do some big time dilation, which is a motif that comes up sometimes in your stories. But I am so excited to sit down and talk with you about this new book. I think that this conversation that I'm planning on having with you now is going to be completely different than any other interview, any other discussion you have about your book. Maybe it will open up some minds, because I consider myself rather a real lover of your work and a student of it. And I'm a friend now, so I get to be in this place where I'm not offering you criticism. I don't have any of that for you today.
Tomorrow you? No,
because it doesn't operate in that space. What I do have is like this analysis that we can endeavor towards uncovering what you're getting at as an author, as a leader, as a historian, as all of these different voices in this one phenomenon called Greg Sarris. It's like, what are you doing with this phenomenal book, The Forgetters? It's out tomorrow. Apparently the publication date is tomorrow.
Yes, I was just reminded, Obi. Thank you.
Yes, the publication date is tomorrow. It's been in bookstores for a minute, so it's already
a couple
selling.
weeks. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, a few weeks.
Because we had the book launch at Book Passage.
That's right. Yeah, a week ago.
A week ago.
Yeah,
that's right. And they I think they sold out of their first.
Yeah.
So everybody should get this book. This is. I was shocked. at this book. The evolution from your previous work, Becoming Story, and even the trilogy that forms from the first book that I read of yours and encountered the same year that my first book came out by Heyday, which was How a Mountain Was Made. There are callbacks. There is this arc that I experienced through you as the voice of these stories from the beginning, from a sacred time when animals were people,
right,
through to the embodiment of history inside of personality, which is, I think, Becoming Story.
Yeah.
Finally to something incredibly mature. Like there's almost like this, like there's like books for children, for like these are the first stories you tell.
Yeah.
And then Becoming Story are the second story. This is almost like the adolescence.
Right.
And then this is the adult.
Yes, that's.
Is that on purpose?
No, I didn't think that way. But all of it was, in some ways, almost I felt a calling to give something to my tribe. I mean, and give something simultaneously to everybody. Remember seeing the global and the local as what I've always kind of done. It's also been perhaps the limits in some ways of my reach as an author, because people think, oh, California or something like that, it's just a small tribe stuff. But these stories, much like some of the Latin American, the magical realism stuff, it's not magical realism because there's no magical realism. It's all the same. Mm-hmm. But I've really mixed sort of some of the European forms, maintaining that indigenous sensibility, so that you will have in the stories shapeshifters. You will have people who don't believe in the old things anymore, only to be hit over the head with them, to be reminded of what those things taught us and what we need to know. So they're complete stories. You have the Crow Sisters again telling them, but the creation stories were, as you said, kids can read them and they're easy and they're fun and they do teach lessons. But those lessons, and the people in the older stories, in How a Mountain Was Made, though when the animals were still people, they were forgetting too. They were doing silly things. But what happened is that when people left the mountain, when they spread out through the world and forgot the morals of those stories and the lessons, the world became an increasingly dangerous place because we made mistakes. We forgot the lessons of how to live here, how to live with one another. I mean, Obi, as we sit here this morning, the consequences of forgetting how to live together are dire worldwide. When you think of the situation in the Middle East, in Sudan, in so many places. So I thought, let's look at the ways in which people have forgotten and need to be reminded to remember. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. In fact, I think the point you're making, especially in terms of war and resolution, is best expressed in the 10th story. This is 10 stories.
Yes.
We've got 10 stories that make their way through all of these different points that seem to be arrayed in kind of a list of items that need to be remembered, and need to be remembered in a way that seems like a map. Yeah. Almost. And it's a map. It's a very interesting kind of map, because I would say, okay, so I've got this ecologist perspective, and I think there is an ecological quality to all of these stories. And I don't mean necessarily the exchange of energy between trophic systems of predator and prey. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the individual as an entity inside of a larger environment, that these stories then unlock a kind of formulation of resiliency. Okay, so 10 stories, and I noticed there's this quasi-historicism that runs throughout this book that's like, it's like 100 years. It's like 1860 to 1960. And then there's one, the 10th story, that takes place in the future. Yeah. But that's such an interesting time, and which is the bottleneck of genocide for the indigenous people. Was that a conscious
That's exactly the whole kind of notion here. You've said it perhaps better than I can say it myself, but again, to sort of bottom line it, it's each individual, all of us, the characters in the stories, the protagonist is usually somebody who has forgotten the we relationship with the world, and instead is in a I, you, or us, them relationship, us versus them, or I somehow feel that I can be smart or clever or something like that, or I want something that isn't necessarily good for the whole.
Yeah,
I'm not thinking of the whole, and they come to the end. The last story, not to give everything away, but it's in the future when we have forgotten all of these things, and the characters in the stories have not remembered, or the larger world hasn't remembered, and we're at a place where obviously we're on the top of the mountain, and it's as a consequence of the earth having heated up so much, the mountain is surrounded by sea, by water, and the mountain itself is dry, with creatures from a hotter, warmer climate, i.e. iguanas, are here. And notice people were struggling, and as soon as they had enough to eat or got comfortable, they started falling back into their old patterns, wanting to explore, wanting to, and are we going to just repeat this cycle once again?
Yeah, that's it. Well, there is a cycle.
Yes.
In the whole narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that we keep coming back to story number 10, because we've got a sort of past this prologue thing. We also have this the rebuilding thing that I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
Like, this is a manual of rebuilding oneself and one's community
simultaneously.
I think that's a good word. I don't think you can do one without the other.
No,
and that point is made implicitly and explicitly throughout the book.
In every story. Thank you, Obi. That's exactly right. And that's one of the things that is antithetical, if you will, to the Western view.
Right.
Where the Western view, so many of our stories, even our biblical stories, are individuals, but the consequences may have something to do with how we treat one another, or who kills somebody's son, or does something like that. But these are very tied, as all indigenous stories have been, to the landscape and to place. And you mentioned earlier about a map. And again, one of my endeavors, one of the things I want to do is, as I've always said, restory the landscape, so that the landscape and place can be remind us. What I'd like to do, and each of the stories takes place in a very specific locale where people will see rocks, or they'll see something, a bare spot of land, a marsh land or wetland that had been contained, and remember a story, or the Crow Sisters will remember a story. So what the Crow Sisters are doing, i.e. via me, I guess, or me via them, is restoring the landscape, and so that these places then remind us. I think the next edition of the book, we need to do a map of, and you're the map guy, Obi, and we can locate just where each of these stories take place.
I made a map for you for the previous book, but this one's good too. But I think we have 3 villages we move through in this book.
Yes,
Forgetters,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
We start in Kahutki.
Yeah.
And then we move to Kobacha in
Yeah.
story 4, and then we have the Mitka.
Yeah, Mitka, yeah.
Mitka. So
Yeah.
those are the 3 villages, none
Yeah.
of which exist today.
Yes, no, they're gone, but we have memory of them.
We have memory of them because we have stories.
And we have stories associated with them.
Yeah.
Not unlike the big, shall we call them the mega stories of Jerusalem, etc.
Right. But for those who aren't familiar with the map of Sonoma County, we've got a lot of people. This is around Bodega Bay and the Russian River watershed and the Petaluma Valley, and the Santa Rosa Valley. There's one,
and the Marin wetlands.
but place is very important. Place is as much a character as anything. Like which story is it? The it's 8 or 9. From Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa is in the title.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. A woman meets an owl, a rattlesnake, and a hummingbird in Santa Rosa.
Yes, yeah.
It's not in Petaluma.
No,
Right.
it's in Santa Rosa.
It's in Santa Rosa, which is this modern, colonized place.
On top of the old Rock Place village, right? It's on top of that place. So the story, even in that story, you go back and you learn about how that village, first of all, got decimated, was wiped out, and then how the Indian people kept coming back to it, even as farms and ranches, and they came back as workers, working around there. And even as they were working, many of them forgetting and then being reminded, not just of the place, but of the stories and its connection to the mountain.
The mountain is the first place.
Yes.
And the big place. It's the Axis Mundi. It's Black Elk Sarney Peak. It's the source of all legends. And in fact, I come at this, of course, with my own baggage or whatever, and I find such relief again and again how you are welcoming to the common humanity, the common experience of the 20th century, the 21st century, in a way that is linked again to the mythogeography that you present, where you forget things because you journey away from the mountain. And I love this play on words, right?
Yeah.
And Europeans, Asian people, whatever, they have journeyed far away from the mountain.
Yes.
The contemporary mind in the 21st century has journeyed far away from the mountain. And remembering how to get back to the place is at the core of every single story we have here.
Right.
How do you get back to the mountain?
How do you get back to the place? The mountain was, first there was the word, as the Bible says, but the here first was the land, was the place, and so it is true. But what I was trying to do here too, Obi, and I hope that people can take away from this, no matter where you're from, all of us have. Even though this is one locale and one sort of group of people, all of us have moved away from an indigenous roots, so that we forgot what we knew before there were nation states and things like that, before we got separated. So in that sense, these stories can become indicative or relevant in ways to all of us, because we've all kind of moved away and forgot indigenous lessons that kept us and reminded us of our relationship and responsibility to land and place. And yes, I am not, my mother's heritage isn't from here, but no matter where I go, if I were to go from somewhere or anywhere, there are still lessons that I need to remember. If you move to Mexico, for instance, it would be really important for you to keep thinking about how much water you're using, what kinds of things you're doing that's going to affect the land there and that subsequently everywhere. So these are all lessons that I think remind us that individually we fool ourselves. We forget that we're connected, no matter where we are in place and history. That's why, as you mentioned, there's different historic periods here, but people still kind of behave and forget.
Reflective of the biological, ecological makeup of the physiogeography itself. This sedge, is these oats. These are not from here, but the mountain is no less the mountain.
It's still the mountain, and there's still life, and we can't go put everything back the way it was. Just like you see the oats, the buttercups, and some of the indigenous kinds of plants and things that are here, we're all here together now. How do we interact in a healthy way? What do we do? We can't just pull out all the oats and kill all of that. Some of the old Indian people in my family used to say, well, I wish the white people would just go back where they came from. And some of the old Bole Maru traditions, the dream dances, the ghost dance was about the white people going away. Well, if you were going to do that, then you'd have to cut me in half. So you can't do that. Just as everything's mixed in our blood, so is it on the land. So how do we take responsibility for this place as it is? How can we be here now and stop, as I've often said in this show, trying to be somewhere else? How can we be responsible here? How can we remember those ancient lessons here and now as we walk through buttercups and European oatgrass?
That's right. So in that quest to be ever more from here, there are particular mechanics that you employ beyond, I think people get caught up sometimes on some of the surreal motifs that you employ. When you talk in your first story about opening the clouds with their door, right? That's the kind of surrealist motif where it's like an image that is meant to. It is a connotation, not a denotation of the metaphor employed, right? So it's pointing to a deeper truth. And what that deeper truth is the exact thing that needs to be remembered.
Okay. You hit the nail on the head right there. So I don't like that metaphor or analogy, by the way. But anyway, that's exactly right. So in the indigenous world and other places, you have shape-shifting. You have a world that isn't as set as we might say in the Western sensibility, or much of the Western sensibility. But that's not the point. The point is, regardless of these surreal or magically real elements that you will see that are by Indian people not just stories or myths, but reality, there is the point of the story. Our creation stories, when Coyote doing things or whatever, it's not what came first or second or whether what's real or not. It's what the story teaches, right? You accept the world, which is what all literature is about. I mean, if you think about so much of literature, the Iliad, the Odyssey, so much of that, Shakespeare just did soap operas, basically. He made up all kinds of stuff about what was going on with, the royals and with power. So much of literature is about morals or lessons. Certainly the great text, whether it be the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Torah, whatever. So many of the sacred texts, are different kinds of sensibilities. So many of my students that I've taught over the years, for 30-some years, Obi, they'll say, well, this can't be real. This can't be real. How can a boy blow wind and open the clouds? Yeah. And not to disparage anything, but many people come from a tradition that a virgin had a child who would be a prophet.
Yeah. For sure.
For sure. And there's stories of Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
So many stories about when the waters were higher that, again, were among indigenous people that continue. The point is not what's real or not real, what world, but what we learn from what we experience.
What we learn from what we experience. I would argue that it's not about being real, it's about being true.
About being true, yeah.
And the truth, here's an idea. Let me know what you think about this. It's like there's this cyclical thing that happens in the Southern Pomo Coastal Miwok creation stories, which I would argue is dislodging from the beginning. They're not creation stories; they're remembering stories. And that's part of the cycle. It's all a cycle. There is no beginning to the cycle. Where you have something like a Genesis in Near Eastern monotheistic tradition.
And that's key, monotheistic. Right, but go ahead.
Yeah, but you've got this this line of history that leads to like the thing that's like the young Earth creationist, which is an ideology that
very linear and orderly
doesn't
and
make any sense to me.
Rational.
Right, exactly. Well, right, because that's the information given.
Yeah.
And it's literal, quite clearly literal. When this is much more, as I say, ecological and specific to the period of time, which is why the quasi-historicism that you employ here is actually really necessary.
Well, it goes back to the whole notion again. I mean, you think of our creation stories about, there's that thing where Coyote was living up here on the mountain, married a frog woman, and he was threw her sons into the sky, and one became the moon and one became the sun, and she started crying. Yes. And her tears created the streams and the rivers and all the water on earth. But before that, you had her washing clothes and leaching acorns in the stream. And Westerners just go, berserk, these Indians, they can't even keep order of things. How can they say she created water when she was just leaching acorns in the water? We don't care about that kind of stuff. It's the lessons from what happens, why she was crying, what Coyote had done. So again, the order of things aren't there. You take the inconsistencies, you take what can't possibly, in many people's minds, be real, and you go with it. Let yourself go.
Yeah. There is no... I think in the first book, the thing that makes the How a Mountain Was Made stories accessible to the youthful mind is because you're very explicit about the lesson being learned.
Yeah.
Okay. So in these later stories, it's a little bit different. You tweak with space, you tweak with time, you tweak with shape, and like I think of the 9th story in the book, which is a girl sees a giant sturgeon. Yeah. Which says explicitly like there's a timelessness here. Like divorce yourself from time in that experience. And like every story is timeless. You say at one point. I think of the phrase, and this gets into the way you employ language and how many double meanings there often are, like lost track of time. Yeah, which is an interesting play on words, as if time were something to track across a landscape. Yeah, but it's also just a sense we have too. It's this. Yeah. It's a shortcut. Yeah. To this truth. How can that be real? That you lose track of time, but it's something we say every day.
Yes, and we often do.
Consciousness. Yeah, we often do. Yeah. The experience of losing
we dream
track of
every
time
night
is an unreality.
Yeah,
it's an unreality.
It's an unreality.
But we know it's true.
Well, and you saw that, and again, the guy that avenges his, tries to get at his stepfather. That story, he shoots animals, he kills things, he wants to impress his girlfriend, he doesn't believe anything of the old ways, and he gets doctored by some medicine women, and he thinks he's been suffering for 200 or 300 years.
400 years.
400 years.
A man shoots his stepfather.
A man shoots his stepfather. Thank you for the title. A man shoots his stepfather, and he realizes at the end of that it's just been one night he's been doctored. And they put him under and doctored him. But what he learned when he lost track of time was, again, reminded him of everything. And he had to go back and replant and redo what he had undone.
I think that story, it's the middle of the book. It's part 6. It's like, well, near the middle of the book, near enough, where the story itself acts as a kind of threshold. And a threshold is a thematic motif that you bring up again and again, like passing through something.
Yeah.
And that being in the middle of the book, because the stories have kind of an arc, I've noticed, from the beginning to the end. And it's certainly almost through time as well.
Yes.
It's like this. He enters a dream at one point. This dream where he's being healed.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the woman in the story is taking the buckshot out of the wound and dropping it into the apple crate.
Yes.
And you come back again and again to that. And I almost imagine like the plink, plink, plink of like a clock or something.
Yes.
So
it is like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the marking of time, right?
The marking of time.
Yeah.
And then you introduce the shapeshifter.
Yeah.
The Valapu.
Yeah.
Which is a word that came up in our last episode,
yeah,
which I was completely unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I have some idea.
Yeah, it tells you
like a Fight Club. The first rule about Walapu is you don't talk about Walapu.
Yes, that's the first. Notice how it ends. They'll speculate, but there is another moral: be respectful to your parents.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Right. And parents as shapeshifters too, in terms of one finding one's own identity.
Yeah.
Right. So there's deeply psychological realms of to be revealed inside of what we're looking for. And I think, is it at that story? I think it is after. Okay, so the whole book takes place in one day.
Yes, it does. That's the other thing. That's the other the other way I'm messing with time.
Right,
because
exactly.
And yet you might not realize that until you're going along, but I do give you hints that the shadows are growing or that it's noon or this, and then all of a sudden you're towards the end, just like one of the Crow sisters, a question woman, and she forgot, oh my God, the time's been passing. As the reader did, you go, oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, the book starts with just on one page, just says good morning.
Yeah.
And at the end it says, until tomorrow.
Until tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got.
But Obi, isn't that what good stories and literature? When you go to a movie, when you read a good book, you're in another world, in another time, and the time that you've been sitting in is going by.
Well, there are many sort of meta levels here in this little book of stories that you wrote, Greg. It's like
thank you for seeing that. Because I that's where this book is. I don't want to say more complex, but more layered than the previous ones.
Exactly correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's a meta level where, because of its digestibility and its size, you could theoretically sit down in the morning and read it in real time until the afternoon.
Yeah.
You could spend the whole day reading.
Yeah, and then find yourself at the end of the day when it's getting dark.
Yeah, you'd be hungry and freaked out, but I think that is one of the reasons why you tell stories in the wintertime.
That's right. That's right.
In summertime, there's work to be done.
Yeah, and you want to be paying attention to work to be done, and you want to be paying attention to what you're doing. You could be sitting there reading a story, and a snake or something could be right next to you.
Yeah. So long-time listeners know that that's the traditional time to tell stories.
Yeah.
That we play with here on the show. But like as other meta layers that I noticed in the book was the reaching back to previous stories.
Yeah.
And it's like these characters exist as if they've read the fiction that you have written.
Yes.
Before, as if this is common knowledge that is in there, as if as if they know that this stuff.
And yet readers won't need to know that. They don't need to know the first ones, but they need to know that there's something or a text or a story that was important that the people forgot. Just like all of us have to remember. We have reference points where we know, we have stories we know from whatever tradition we come from, being greedy, selfish, all those things are, we've heard stories you're not supposed to do those things, and we forget. Mm-hmm. And these characters do the same thing.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of points. Now, a girl sees a giant sturgeon. This is the 9th story. The 8th story. Okay, so what is the shapeshifter? The 8th story is a man learns to smell flowers, and I'd put it to you that this is just a great piece of queer fiction. Like this is something. This is an important story.
I'm glad you caught that. And yet, I think, for all of us book banners, I think this would give you a hint to the book banners. This one, I think I could slip by you, but I just gave it away because.
Well, it's about lying.
It's about lying, and we don't even know.
Lies to ourselves.
We don't even know if this guy for sure is having a sexual relationship. They could just be friends, right. But everything got construed. Right. As that he's gay and dangerous in a time when Christianity had taken over and forbid those kind of things, and the Indians actually would use that to get back at this guy or get at him, not because even they initially cared, but because there was someone who was jealous of this man, jealous of his relationship with the owner's wife. Not sexual, but he was a friend with her. And how come he gets to be friends? Well, there's something wrong with him. Let's put him down. Let's find a way to get rid of this man, or get him out of our camp, or demonize him, or other him. Let's other this guy. He's a little different anyway, as any child will be. I'm sure you and I, Obi, as children, were a little different. But, people would say to us, or say to kids, they'd start making up things about them, whether they were true or not. And in this case, this guy is much like the hummingbird. It's pollinating. He has a special way.
Well, his name is Calupus.
Yeah, he's a hummingbird.
That is
because he behaved like, and he was simultaneously a hummingbird. That's what he really was. And the moral of the story is, you get rid of one person, you get rid of one species, and the environment and the world will suffer as a consequence.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end,
there's a lot of morals in there, though. These stories don't have one moral. Right?
Oh no, they're complicated. Yeah, in that sense. But remember, the Indians are all saying he's a curse. Then they start saying he's evil. Not only is he probably homosexual, but he's also got bad powers, and he's misusing them, and he's cursing people and putting spells. He probably put spells on the owner's wife. The last line of the story is, the curse was his absence. We punish or do something, Obi, with a species, and we lose it. What happens? What happens if we lose our bees?
Right.
What happens if we lose our pollinators?
Right.
We're cursed. They cursed us.
Right.
We hurt them.
Right.
We curse ourselves. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, yeah, that's the curse. You use words like that sometimes. This is the only story also where there's 2 characters who are named.
Yeah.
Normally the only character you name is the protagonist who needs to do the remembering.
Yes.
Most of the time the protagonist is female in this book.
Yes.
From Mary to Isabel to Magdalena. You have all of these different. In this we've got Calupus, hummingbird.
Yeah.
Who what is it? Calupus went about light as a feather.
Yes.
Which is which you say again and again. And then the antagonist is named in this story too, Catfish.
Yeah.
And Catfish is the one who does the lying.
Yes.
And
he's the one that's jealous.
And he's the one that's jealous.
Yes, and he's the one that wants what to be something else and better or different from what he is.
That's right. And then and it all takes place on this, not in one of the three villages. This is on the left rancheria.
Yeah, which, where they were working. Yeah,
yeah. Which was that's a historical site?
Well, it was a small rancheria, where at which point, in that point in history, there were just groups of Indians, often interrelated families, that were working, that were hired and lived there. They allowed them to live on the ranch as laborers. And so they were living there, and they had a good life there.
Yeah.
That's it. They had a good life. And one man's jealousy over this person. And I threw all those hints in there. He's light as a feather, as a hummingbird is,
right, but
also the stereotype of a gay person, right? Yeah. So all these that you could play on if you wanted to. So, and then again, you talk about the magical kind of stuff. Remember what Catfish was trying to do following that guy for night after night through the force, which was a long journey, which he found out he was going around and around in circles when he could have just gone right through the force. But that, again, shows you how messed up his mind was.
The psychological landscape. I think that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah,
he wasn't sure exactly if he was a shapeshifter or not.
Yeah.
And if he would be cursed.
The
fear of the curse.
If they'd get him, yeah.
Brought about this emergent surprise at the end of the story.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about the whole stories in this analysis.
Yeah.
So I hope that our audience isn't thinking that we're ruining any of the stories, because we're not. The relationship to the resolution is a necessary component of understanding the story.
And is the story. It is the story. And we can talk all about it, but until you read it, I hope we're intriguing you to read it, because then you see how it all happens. How each of these things happen. Yeah. How a girl sees a giant sturgeon, how seeing that sturgeon fostered a relationship not just with the ocean, but with her mother forever.
With her mother.
Yes.
So this big 10-foot long green sturgeon, like that's how big they get.
Yeah.
Comes up to the shore, and then there's this thing about turning into stone.
Yeah.
The creature of the earth, underneath in the subconscious, and then the big glassy black eye, which I think is the motif of the threshold.
Yeah.
That the little girl sees herself in.
Yes.
And this little girl has problems.
Yeah.
Like she's adopted, and her adopted mother.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because that sort of mirrors your own life history, and yet this becomes an anchor for a connection, a reconciliation towards pieces of her own identity throughout their whole life.
Yeah. That locust, that sturgeon, even though the sturgeon goes home, interesting, the sturgeon is able to go home as the mother and daughter create a home for themselves. And what binds that home, what created that home and keeps the home, is the memory of that sturgeon and the wetlands.
Yeah. The sturgeon is an interesting character, because it doesn't have a voice.
Yeah.
So many, so this book's a little bit different than the other ones too, because the animals don't talk as much. Mm-hmm. I think of the bear in the first story. I mean, there's a couple of things that are like in every story, right?
Yeah.
Like, in addition to the protagonist, and then the protagonist's relationship to what can be called the singular plural, that is the community.
Yeah.
Right. The community is sort of like this amorphous thing that imposes, which often acts as the antagonist towards the protagonist, right?
Yeah.
And then there's like this tertiary character, which is the animal, And then there's another tertiary character, which is usually some sort of power focus. It's usually some kind of object.
Yeah.
I think of the strawberry.
Yeah.
In the one story, or
Yeah.
I think of the sturgeon here in this case is like both.
Yes. Yeah.
And the I mean, we could just I was just thinking that we could go down the list. There's also another character that came up quite a bit in this book, which is the character of water.
Yeah.
Okay, so water seems to be the interconnector of all things. There's a lot of talk of the story from the first book about Copeland Creek and the water that way. There's a lot of the book closes with the flooding of the world.
Yes. Yeah.
And the rebuilding from that. But the people go to the other mountains in Sonoma County over the water.
Over the water, yes.
Right. So it's like the very real.
As people moved about the land moved about the world in historic times, Obi. Right. But remember, water. It's another thing. Boy, you really saw everything in this book. You did. But water is the thing that connects all of us, and water is essential for life. So the stories and the people are never far from water. Water is always where it began or where it ends or where we find ourselves somehow.
Mm-hmm. Water is water. It's like there's an axiomatic thing you say at one point here that I thought was, okay, so Isabella, though she didn't say anything, had an answer for him. Water is water. It's connected everywhere. Anyone can become a story. Isn't that all anyone becomes? I mean, you allude to your previous book's title in that passage right there.
Yeah.
To give, okay, so here's another meta layer I'd like to suggest. It's like you, the author, you are a protagonist inside of the larger singular plural community that is your relationship to your people, Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, the Southern Pomo, and the Coastal Miwok, but also these stories themselves and your responsibility to that. And I marvel at your ability as a professor of the English language and narrative structure, but also your engagement with the ancient structure of these stories. And I'm always curious about how you grew up with uncovering your own story, your relationship to the prophet S.E. Parrish and the dreamer Mabel McKay. It's like when do you, is this exhausted? Can you keep going? How many stories are there?
Well,
talk about that a little bit.
There's endless stories. There will be stories as long as we are here and have language. So the stories are endless. I'll never be able to tell any of them or all of them. But, you hit on something really important. I write these, I think, because I feel responsible for telling them. So I feel that if you know something or if you have a story, we're here for a very short time. When you think about time in so many ways, and we're here forever. So what are the things, what must I do given the place in history and time that we're in, which is in many ways problematic? And what do I know, or at least I think I'm arrogant enough to not just know, or lucky enough to know, and arrogant enough to think that I can write and need to tell them to other people. So all of those things come together in a form of ultimately me sitting down and saying, Greg, tell this story. Somebody can learn or benefit from this. Something will be remembered. Something is here that is important. The old people used to say, Obi, and I think I've said this before here in our show, our podcast, is that the richest person, when the richest person who dies is the person, when they die, is the person with the most stories. The richest person is the person with the most stories.
Okay.
And again, let me extrapolate. Let me go on with that. If you're that rich, don't hold your stories. Give them away. Share them. Right? And that's what you have to do. I mean, if being rich means having lots of stories, give them away. Just as I believe if you're rich and have a lot of gold or money, you should give that away too. But in my case, it's the stories that I've inherited and heard, and my education. And as you were suggesting, Obi, all these things come together so that I can textualize in stories what I know. So I've heard various stories. I can add to them, have them go on. Many people have said to me, well, those aren't exactly old stories. Our stories were always changing, always emerging.
Right.
They never were fixed.
Right.
They were never fixed. They were never fixed. People will say, well, of course, they'll look at even the textualized stories are not fixed. Look what's going on with biblical interpretation, right? There's so many versions, and the story never stays still. When you're a young man or woman and you're reading Romeo and Juliet or King Lear, those stories are very different when you're 18 versus 70 or 80. Because King Lear will look like a certain way, you'll really kind of get it when you're older. And Romeo and Juliet looks a certain way when you're young, and when you're older it looks a certain way. So even the story doesn't stay fixed, even if it's textualized, as you understand it. Remember, stories are about relationships. Relationships between the reader and what is heard or read. And so, again, I want to extend my relationships in this text, and readers can take them away. One of the things I don't want to forget, we might think these stories are too complicated. I really feel, and people feel, they're entertaining. There's a lot of humor in them. They're funny. They move quickly. They're surprise endings and that hit you on the head like, I want you to experience, you think you're kind of smart like this character and you know how the story's going to end. Surprise! Which is what we learn, and it reminds us to be humble, that we don't know everything.
Right. Well, Answer Woman and Question Woman, who are our guides, opening every chapter with almost kind of a, what did we learn from that last one? They have various attitudes about that, but they're almost always laughing.
Yeah,
right? They really offer in their exposition some the humorous backbone.
Or they're very human, and like two sisters are always bickering too. Yeah. They get irritated with one another. No, I think it went this way. Well, you're not thinking of this. You always forget. How do you know? Right. So they're human, if you will, even as they are the vehicle from which the stories spring. Their dialogue, and they need each other. One can't remember the stories unless she's asked. And the one who asks always forgets. So they need each other. That relationship itself is emblematic of one of the themes of the book.
One of the things we've talked about before on this program is war, in terms of the ritualistic manifestation of that in indigenous Californian culture, specifically in our area right now. In the last story, and story 10 to take place in the future, where there's this storytelling contest, there is an implicit conflict between Orange Sunfish and Iguana Eyes, the two leaders of these tribes. This is in the distant future, after the world is flooded. The world in quotes there, because we don't really know what's happening beyond the big peaks.
Right.
You call them out, right? You call out Mount Tam and Mount Diablo and Mount St. Helena, the ones you can see from the top of this mountain.
Right.
And And there's two peoples on each side of the mountain.
This mountain, yeah.
This mountain, that's right. And then the old women, which is very important, especially in times of forever war and reinterpretation that we seem to be in kind of in the 21st century. There's been a war for the past 25 years in the Middle East. I know it's way more ancient than that, but there is a prescription here in this story.
Yeah.
To transcending that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the delivery of that nuanced message, I think, is probably cosmically significant.
It is, because, again, if you think about the progression of the work, even that what's alluded to in this book is that there was the time before this one when all the animals were still people. Right. Then there's this time, and then I've jumped at the very end to another time. And are we going to continue the same? Once again, are we going to start up this same pattern of forgetting these kinds of things? The irony in the last story, not to give things away again, is that the storytelling contest, they start telling stories or myths about how that last world ended, the world we're in right now. And yet they get so competitive, they start destroying the place they're at to win the contest and start a war with one another. Hence, the two women who are the judges of the stories, these two wise women, one from each village, each group, row away. They're the ones that are going to get to go explore the new lands, as old and as somewhat feeble as they might be, or unable to traverse these waters. They're the ones that are left the wisest because they have the greatest story to tell, which is about the forgetters.
The forgetter's curse. The whole world suffers and transforms because of it.
And that's exactly what you were saying, or thank you, Obi. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what you were saying earlier. That's the huge metaphysical kinds of thing right there, right? We constantly, as conscious human beings, consciousness makes us believe in many ways that we're separate, that you're there and I'm here and the flower's there. But the reality is, even if we don't experience it in certain ways, we're all connected. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're all interdependent, and we're all made of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And you, as a scientist, know. I mean, just the biology of life is so similar.
I'm shocked at always how young a story it is.
Yeah.
Right. Ecology is a word that has only been in common practice for the past 30 years, for the past 50, 60 years or so. Right. Yeah. Really since the 60s is when it became like a common common word that people use outside of academic institutions.
50 some years. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, in our lifetime. Right. As opposed to there's the novelty, and then there's the ancient aspects of it too. It's like, of course, it's interconnected that way.
Yeah,
you want to use that word, okay?
Yeah,
there are, as we, gosh, it's so apparent to me in my new book on fire ecology, as we are learning, and we're interfacing with the indigenous critique, rooted in traditional ecological knowledge that is the backbone of how all of these systems work, the systems that support every human society that has ever existed or could ever exist. Mm-hmm. So that and it's on that statement I believe is why I'll keep doing this for the rest of my life.
And me too. I'll keep writing, Obi. Yeah. I think traditional ecological knowledge, remember, the indigenous people, as we came and moved about, we had to learn too. We just had a lot of time. And as I once said to Malcolm Margolin, the founder of Heyday Press, that it was traditional ecological knowledge came about as a result of science and dream coming together. Because it was science, we made mistakes, I'm sure, as we moved to a new landscape and we didn't understand, so we had to learn scientifically. But then there was also dream and stories that were connected and went together. I think optimistically, and potentially optimistic, maybe I should say, that dream and story and science are coming together once again. Because now, as an entire people on this earth, we're having to learn these eternal lessons of survivance once again. Where we've all found ourselves somehow strangers in a place. How do we all live here again? Can we? We got lessons to learn.
I think we can really dive into that word dream, because you use it many times across the whole corpus of your work. That's very specific to how it is employed by the Southern Pueblo Coastal Miwok, specifically like Mabel McKay. Like, her dream is not unlike how writing is, and reading comprehension occurs within the quote unquote Western mind when you have this integration of cultural metaphor and knowledge into the reconciled individual across the psychological landscape applied to the community, its habitat, and its vitality. Right. So both Mabel and Essie, they told, and most the Indian doctors, I even heard about my great-great-grandfather, Tom Smith, they had to go through this kind of otherworldly experience to understand how they were going to do what they needed to do, the stories and the doctrine they needed to do here. For instance, Essie Parrish told the story about the experience of when she was a young girl and becoming a dreamer, how she had to go under this place and on this long journey in this other world where she had to cross dangerous bridges and had many challenges that she had to get through to come back. Well, we might call that a dream, but it was, and it may have been in the dream or whatever, an experience, but it prepared her for what she would do here, gave her a kind of knowledge. Tom Smith, there was a place in Bodega Bay where the Indian doctors would go under the water to a cave, and there was like, as they modern say, there was like a shopping mall of things the Indian doctors and medicine people, songs they could take, charm stones or whatever, that they would learn how to use once they resurfaced and came back to the earth, above the water. Of course, the joke goes that Tom Smith got greedy and took too many things, but as Indian doctors could or would, it depends on how they use them. But they all had these experiences that were not as we typically think of the world here and now, and yet to them, those places were as real as ever. They were struggles, the dreams told stories. The dreams told stories. Mabel told the stories of the things she saw in her dream. Essie Parrish, saw AIDS before, 40 years, 50 years before AIDS. She saw that these things would come and would tell the stories and describe them. Well, I think that the revelation is often an emergent thing. You're not exactly sure what it means, but I'm really not afraid of this language at all. I don't think it's woo at all to describe the journey down. I mean, it sounds like psychotherapy somehow. It sounds like, I saw Richard Dawkins debating Jordan Peterson, and at one point he says, "You're drunk on symbols," which is an interesting criticism. Because we tend to think of two schools of human thought. Cornel West says like the school of Athens and the school of Jerusalem, right? The school of science versus the school of revelation. Right? And how can those two play off each other when in fact the experience of consciousness is much more fluid? You think of Einstein stepping on the train and remembering the special theory of relativity for the first time, E equals MC squared. It's like we are in this state as part of this consciousness experience, which is something that is elusive to science. It must be, because there's no amount of meditation that you can do that will reveal the fact that you have a brain at all. Right.
or you explain away certain things. I remember once I asked Mabel McKay, or somebody asked Mabel McKay, it was probably me, I was that dumb at one point, or dumber than I am now, and I said, well, what does a story symbolize?
Okay.
And Mabel said, I don't know nothing from no symbols. You know, and then
that's really good.
And then she said, I said, well, what does it mean? And she said, life will teach you about the story the way the story teaches you about life.
Right.
So these stories here in this book, you know, these characters are learning that, and readers will be reminded of that and experience that, I hope, as they read these stories.
I think that's right. You know, the old stupid question, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
I think that gets to why we named this show Place and Purpose at all.
Yeah.
You know, to know your place, to have your purpose, to be embedded in an ecological story unfolding all the time that is always searching for greater resiliency.
Yeah.
Towards all of these vectors of stress that are imposed from without and from within. How do we get there together? How do we work this through with at least just give me a moment of clarity, which is something that the forged sentence printed on a piece of paper gives us. It's the promise of great literature.
It allows you to kind of meditate on, think about, hold the book and just stop. I don't know why it's all of a sudden has come up, Obi. Maybe it's I'm not Einstein stepping on anything, but the train. But I keep thinking of Gregory Bateson, who used the phrase ecology of mind.
Yes. Wrote a book called that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a collection of his essays.
Yeah.
And he was a scientist, but he also was constantly reminded of the limits of science and what it can tell us about what it can't tell us. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting. He also said the only time he really experienced connection where he was with nature and all of that, he talked about having taken LSD. Mm-hmm. And he felt kind of one with the tree that he was, I forget, cutting or taking apples from or something. But otherwise, his point wasn't go out and take drugs. His point was there are ways in which there are stories that can take us to places where we can experience a relationship, an understanding that we are connected. I think when I read literature, after I read good stories or see something, I walk out and the yellow is more yellow in the flower. Mm-hmm. You know, you read something really good and my senses are alive and you know, I don't become a hummingbird or anything like that. But I think, God...
what if you do, you're not supposed to say?
And I'm not supposed to say. Yes. Some people, some of the.
I don't know if I believe you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, remember what Mabel used to say: whether you believe it or not, it's true.
It's a mantra. She has so many. She's such a beautiful splinter.
Yeah.
In so much of the way I think about the world. It's not scientific. The limits of science. I always say yet. We do not know what the children of today, what experiments they're dreaming about now.
Yeah.
That might uncover evidence-based reproducibility of something like the dream experience.
Yeah.
That could unlock intergalactic space travel. We don't know, you know.
And it all depends. Well, one of the things that they're finding out about the mind, that we can understand the entirety or experience the entirety of the universe. Mm-hmm. But and Einstein was alluding to that. The question is, as in the ancient stories that I allude to or write about, or the newer ones that I write about, Obi, the question is, what do we do with it?
What do we do with it?
Do we act like use it as a form of power over others and over nature, which we know hasn't never worked, or do we use it as a way to reconnect? Mm-hmm. You know, books aren't bad. They could, remember, stories can kill, or they can heal. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, stories killed 6 million Jews. Stories are creating wars. We can also do stories that can undo that, and that can doctor and heal. It's all we have. Stories can be our best medicine.
I am concerned as you are. You just told me that LA Times is getting rid of their book section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They let go their book editors.
The end of an era, and yet they're still holding on to the LA Times Book Festival,
and
which you're going to.
And it's very sad. The book editor, a wonderful guy, I'm on a panel with 2 people that wrote very different books, books that are very popular right now. Justin Torres' Blackouts, the queer novel that got the National Book Award, and he just got a Guggenheim, and Akbar Keva, who wrote Martyr. I'll be on a panel with them. And the LA Times book editor is the one that's going to be interviewing us. And we were exchanging email, and I just said how sad and ironic that, and yet I'm honored that this guy that's done these great things put together this panel and chose my book and me to be on it. But how sad, and again, as I keep saying, ironic, Obi, that he doesn't have a job. I mean, he's done so much to keep reading and all of that alive, and so yeah, it's pretty sad what's going on. But as you mentioned, now I got to take Obi's words as we were walking here talking about this. You said, well, maybe there'll be other forums online or other kinds of forums or podcasts where, like today, we can talk about books.
Didn't Mabel say something about it didn't go anywhere?
That's the spirit, she said. Somebody said, well, Mabel, you're the last dreamer or medicine woman. What's going to happen to the spirit? And she started laughing. She said, it ain't going to go nowhere. It ain't going to hide under a rock. It's going to be everywhere.
It's going to be everywhere. Yeah. And I think that's manifest in the emergence that is this book, The Forgetters, right?
Yes.
Like who could have predicted this? That
Not me.
You have codified these dreams into these word forms that unlock pieces of my own heart I didn't even know were locked up.
Yeah.
And that is the greatest gift. And what that form is going to be as technology shifts, as reading fades or morphs into scrolling, which I think most people do now, than actually cracking a book. Yeah. I'm such a bibliophile that I find magic in this fetish. The object that is this fetish, this book that is
you and me both.
Is so. I don't think you can improve on this interface towards the story. I don't like reading on phones. I don't like reading on screens. No. I like traversing the printed ink with my eyes as if I'm hiking through the chapters of a forest.
And holding it in my hands.
That's exactly right.
And thank you, Obi. One of the things that's, when you talked about emotions, good stories should hit you on so many levels. They should hit you in your mind thinking, but simultaneously the emotions, so that reading becomes a fully human experience.
A fully human experience. I think that is a really good point to end on, Greg. It's like my wife Allie. I've been reading this book for a week now, and I'm like, you got to read this. Like this is not like, it says on the back, it's like classic style, the Southern Pomo Coast Miwok creation stories. It's like, okay.
Well, it's not really classics. I
whatever
mess
that
with
means.
it.
You're exactly.
Yes.
You mess with it. This is a story for now. About now.
Yes, yeah.
And it is a story about the way things have been, are, and will always be. And that is such an anchor for so much hopeful resource.
Oh, Obi, you couldn't have said it better. Write that down and then put that on a book review. Thank you so much.
Recording this.
Thank you. Yeah, we are, right. Listen,
let's see if we got
underline that part of the podcast, or embolden it somehow.
Hey, we got some text from our producer here. Okay. The winner for today. Remember, go to placeandpurpose.live, register your email, and also I would like to say to our people, like, so all of these videos that we've done over the past 2 years are up on YouTube. Go check them out. Leave a comment.
Let us know.
That's a great place to write down a question, a spark, something you'd like to know more about, and then we can gear up to address it in the next episode. So go check that out.
Yeah, which is what we always wanted to do. We wanted to have a kind of dialogue with not just with one another and our guests, but with our guests that are listening.
That's right. That's right. So our winner today, because every month our producers take one person who has registered, and they get a signed book from Greg and myself, both of our respective collections. The winner for today is Esteban Orozco from Seattle, Washington.
Wow. Hello, Esteban.
Yes.
Thank you for listening.
That's great.
Thank you for caring.
A lot of people in the chat are saying they are already enjoying Greg's book.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
Rate me. Go to Goodreads and other places and rate me, so we can get the book out there.
That's right.
Which is Obi and I. If the LA Times are going down and people aren't reading, it's up to us to get up there and cheer one another on and say, read. As I always, Obi, I've said this before, when I would leave my classrooms, and I'd always say to the students, remember, it's not a sin to think.
Yes, please.
Yes. Keep reading.
Please.
You know what, Obi? I get real worried. This is the last thing. I have friends who are poets, and I love poetry, and I have friends who are poets, and they say, well, nobody reads poetry anymore. And I said, well, I worry about fiction, books like this, or reading, period. And I said, God forbid we end up like Mabel McKay and the old basket weavers in a museum sitting there weaving baskets. Instead, don't let Obi and I be in a museum with a pencil or a typewriter writing in front of people so they see how we do things.
Chilling image, Greg.
Obi will be doing his marvelous drawings, and I'll be with my pencil and pen, and people can come by and watch us work.
We'll do it for 400 years and wake up and realize it's only been a night.
Yes, yeah. But that's kind of a bad dream, though.
It is a bad dream.
Let's make it not happen. Let's make a good dream, everyone.
Well, although we had a big span of time between last episode and this episode, because of the way calendars and weather and all that kind of stuff, we have only 2 weeks until our next episode. And that is with the local author, Mangela Martin. Yes. Who wrote a really wonderful book. Well, and I often see it sitting next to your book in the bookstores. So go check this one out too. It's called The Last Fire Season. Yeah. And this is a personal memoir. I've had the opportunity to have a chat with her at Green Apple Books, actually, down in San Francisco. Support your local bookstore. But she's a great writer, excellent wit. And she is from Sonoma and Santa Cruz, and this is about that fall in 2020 between the Wahlberg fire, which is was one of the mega fires on the west side of 101, where she lived, and simultaneously her other home burning in the CZU fire, which is the Santa Cruz Mountains that torched Big Basin State Redwood Park down there. And
and she wrote about that in her personal essay and did reflects on the history and stuff. It's a really interesting book.
Exactly. So we'll sit down and talk with her about that in a couple of weeks.
Perfect.
But meanwhile, thank you very much, Greg. What a great time.
Thank you, Obi. I mean, the fact that I feel self-conscious and humbled that we dedicated this podcast to my book, The Forgetters. And Obi, again, you're the one who just has. I think it's a wonderful thing. I do a lot of the kind of the stories and stuff, and you document so much the deserts, the forest. I mean, the stuff that you've done, Obi, and now the fires. You kind of doing a trajectory yourself, as we said at the beginning of this podcast. The progression of your work has led you to a certain place that I think this next book that we can learn from and hopefully not be doomed by. So fire, yes,
well,
fire.
Great inspiration to you. I am happy to be the question woman to your answer woman.
All right, we need to be here. Look around. Look at the yellow flowers, and look at the flowers that are coming up. The lupin, the small lupin that are around. The California poppies. Oh. Did you see them going up and down the mountain?
Oh, I did.
They're
sure
amazing
did.
This year.
Amazing.
Because we're living in an ecological bubble right now, a climactic bubble, I should say, because we're getting a little more rain than normal. Everywhere else seems to be more stressed than we are. But all the great grass and so forth, let's hope that it's not consumed by fire.
Right. Eventually it will be.
Yes.
Eventually it will be. There's waves. There's for every point of despair, there's a point of hope.
Yeah, and we just go with it and remember the stories.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Until next time.
Thank you, Obi.
Thank you, Greg.
Bye.